So as you find your seats here, and we gear up to power through until lunch here with two great customer presentations coming up. I thought I'd just ask, a quick show of hands. It's nice to know who's in the room from a couple of different perspectives. How many people, everyone here is using the desktop client, right? You've got to have the desktop client. How many people here use Adept Explorer in the crowd? Show of hands, okay. How about Reviewer? Keep your hand up if you also use Reviewer. The web client, no? Just a few. How about Adept Creator? I know just recently launched. Okay. How many Publish Wave customers do we have? Folks using Publish Wave, okay. And how many have some customization, whether it's developed by Synergis or home developed? Okay, great. Need to see what's going on out there. So our next presenter from Dow Chemical. So I won't share a whole lot because Chris is going to give some nice background on Dow, but we've been working for Dow. I think it's been for about 7 years, and they've done a tremendous amount with Adept. It's been a great journey for us. They've got a phenomenal team of people at Dow that we've been lucky enough to be partnered with. They are in the process, and Chris will correct me if I've got the numbers wrong, of replacing about 20 different document management systems over about 40 locations worldwide. So that's the journey they're on. Let me introduce to you, please give a welcome to Christopher Wood from Dow. Thank you, Chris.
So thank you all for being here. It's a real privilege to come here and speak. We've already seen some really fantastic presentations. They've really set the bar high this year, and I'm going to work on trying to lower that a little bit, okay? So as Scott said, my name's Chris Wood. I'm with the Dow Chemical Company. I'm the support SME. And if I can get this to go. I really didn't want to do this slide, but Martha insisted. So a little bit about me. I live in Sugar Land, Texas. You know, I've been a lot of places and I've done a lot of things. Some of them are related to technical stuff and a lot of other things, you know. I've been around. Rode hard and put away wet. I spent several years in the Navy doing various things, submarines, surface ships, that sort of thing. And then I spent a lot more than several years working in the oil field. I did field engineering on oil rigs. I did various management positions, training, knowledge management, and all that stuff. And actually, about 4 years, Scott, it seems like 7 years, but about 4 years ago, if I can get this to work. Yeah, I joined Dow Chemical. They were looking for somebody to support Adept at that time. I met the minimum technical requirements they were looking for. Didn't know anything about Adept. Here we are 4 years later, and I know a little bit more about Adept. All right. And so my primary focus is customer support, and in my case, my customers are the Adept users inside of Dow. I also am interested in quality control, and I also like a little bit about reporting, that sort of thing. So that is the toughest slide. Thank you, Martha. I managed to get through that. What I wanted to talk to you about today, first to just give you a brief overview of something about Dow. Let me have a show of hands. How many of you here have never heard of Dow Chemical? So it's pretty much a household name. It's a big company. By big company, well, okay, I'm sorry. We're also going to talk not only about Dow, but we're going to talk about two of the major systems that Dow uses. We're just going to talk briefly about those, but to give you a background of what we're using Adept for. We will talk a little bit about reporting. I had the pleasure a couple of years ago of presenting what we did in terms of a custom reporting portal to report what we're doing with Adept. And I'm going to give a recap of that. And then I'd like to spend most of my time talking about our metadata quality improvement initiative. So we have a little bit of a problem with our metadata. We got irregularities, inconsistencies. Y'all probably don't have this, so it may not be even applicable to you, but we're going to I'm going to explain what our problem was and how we approached solving the problem. And perhaps there are some ideas that you can take away, or maybe we can encourage Synergists to adopt or whatever. But we'll see. And so, Dow Chemical. It's a big company. By big, I mean it has about 54,000 employees, and those are the direct employees. It probably has that number again in terms of direct or contract personnel. It's a global company, multinational. Actually, it operates in 160 countries around the world. So, you wouldn't think of Dow. You think of Dow as a traditional brick and mortar sort of middle or 1980s type management U.S. company. You wouldn't think it's very dynamic, but it's actually pretty dynamic. What we're seeing is we're seeing a whole lot of activity in terms of mergers and acquisitions, and along with that, we're also seeing a lot of divestitures. So what you can imagine, you've got these huge industrial sites all around the world. They've got individual plants that are sprinkled around inside of these industrial sites. And chemical companies seem to be trading these plants like kids use or trade baseball trading cards or something, right? Speaking of baseball, go Astros, right? Okay. But speaking of mergers and acquisitions, Dow, as a chemical company, has three core product lines. They've got agricultural chemicals, bulk chemicals, and then specialty chemicals. Now, there's another company you may or may not have heard of, and it's called DuPont. Yes. DuPont is also a very large chemical company, and it also has an agricultural product line, bulk chemical product line, and it has specialty chemicals. And so what the boards of those two companies got together and said, wouldn't it be great if we could merge our assets? So they've merged, and we actually technically are now Dow DuPont. And they're aligning their agricultural, bulk chemical, and specialty chemical product lines. Now you're probably all sitting there, every one of you sitting there saying, wait a minute, the SEC would never let such a merger exist. That's going to be too big, too powerful of a company. We've got to do something about this. And you're exactly right. The intent of the merger was only to allow us to align and bring those product lines together and then split it apart. So what we're doing is we're splitting, and there will be a new Dow Chemical which is going to have all of the bulk chemical assets. A new entity called Corteva, if I can click right, Corteva is going to take all of the agricultural assets, and the new DuPont will have all of the specialty chemical assets. So as you're thinking about Adept and all this, you have all these plants that are out there with all these different systems, and we're currently trying to say, wait, we're picking up plants that used to be DuPont, and they're going to lose access when we make the split, so we got to get all their stuff into our system very quickly. It's a bit of a challenge. So aside from that, Dow, back in the 80s, it was popular for large companies to outsource all of their engineering. Get rid of all their engineers, engineering departments, everything else. Dow retained their engineering. They do a large amount of internal engineering, but they also do a lot of engineering with external companies as well. We currently have two major implementations of Adept, our Asbuilt system and our capital project system. But we also, well, by the way, we didn't have enough work to do, so we now have 4 additional implementations of Adept that we're looking at deploying. So, our Asbuilt system. This is our primary system. It's there as an engineering document repository. What we want to do is we want to put all of our engineering documents for documenting how the plants are currently constructed inside of our system. And our charter was basically to consolidate and replace a lot of older document management systems because everybody had something different. As I said, Dow is there's been a lot of acquisitions, a lot of mergers, et cetera, and everybody's got their old legacy systems. They've got homegrown systems. They've got systems like Panagon and Documentum. Many of them are out of date, not supported. So we've got to get all their stuff into our system. But one of our key tenets is as we bring in these sites' documents, we don't want to really break their current work process if we don't have to. We want to keep them working the way they're used to. So, briefly looking at, this is a view from our reporting portal. And what this is showing is a graph, and you can see starting in 2013, this is showing how many views, document views, how many prints, how many copies, check-ins, check-outs, et cetera, this sort of information. So this is, first off, this is one of the value charts that we provide from our reporting portal, which we showed a couple of years ago. But you can see now we're at the point where we're over 50,000 document views per month.
Wow.
Okay. Here we have a different view, and this is showing our document growth. And so this is actually just showing the current in documents, not all of the versioned revisions that we have. Now, you can see in the beginning we started and we were doing a bunch of stuff that was all manual and very tedious and very time consuming. It takes about 12.5 seconds per document to do a scan and sync and extract and do all this other stuff, you know. It was taking us some time. And because we had a backlog of about 3 years of migration projects, we said this is going to take too long. We've got to come up with a solution. So we worked with Synergist, and we developed with them a process which we called a bulk migration process. And we did that right there. And what it was is we took and they provided us some tools where we could create a migration database. We could import documents and put them in a vault and put them in this standalone database, take that database, send it to Synergist, take our online database, put it offline, send it to Synergist, merge those two databases together, send it back to us, and boom. In a single weekend, we imported 50,000 or 500,000 documents. It's pretty good. The problem with that is that, well, trying to manipulate and transmit a 60 gigabyte database backup file, FTP and everything, just becomes too cumbersome. And so we said, you know, and every time we do it, the database keeps getting bigger. So we can't keep doing this. We got to come up with a different solution. So one of my colleagues, Roman Fernandez, was working as a project manager for our next major project. And we got together. We got with Synergist. Specifically, we got with Andrew Cummings, who was doing contract work for Synergist, and they developed this new process. We developed a tool, and we use that tool, and this is what we refer to as an enterprise migration tool. And what it allows us to do is we can import about 75 to 100,000 documents in a single hour. So we could take an outage on a Friday evening, we could shove 200,000 or 300,000 documents in, and then have the system back up. We'd have to set up the security and all that other stuff. The libraries would be there. We get it all configured. We start doing extraction, and we turn the system back on. But in a very short period of time, over a series of weekends, we were able to import 1.3 million documents. So that gets us up to our close to 3 million document level now. And with that enterprise migration tool, we were also able to, one of our requirements was we weren't just taking the current level document, we were also shoving in the history. So we have all those previous revisions that the systems that we're moving from were tracking. So that was extremely beneficial. We wouldn't have been able to do that without the support from Synergist. So some of our challenges very quickly, I mean, 3 million documents, you know, that's, well, unfortunately, we're going to have a heck of a lot more than that by the time we finish. We've got over 5,000 users right now. You might not think that's a big deal. Try to send a bulk email to 5,000 people. It gets to the point where even my mailbox won't let me send something with that many sendees. Okay. We have 6 vaults plus 2 satellite servers in different regions around the world. I've got 5 terabytes of drawing data. We've got 40 top-level libraries or sites that we have to deal with. And a lot of this is legacy and acquisition sites. So you can just imagine some of the challenges that we're facing. In terms of capital projects, very briefly, capital projects in Dow, we've got 3 different engineering models. We do some projects where we just turnkey and just outsource everything. We have other projects where we do everything internally, and then we have other projects where we end up doing a combination. And with any of these capital projects, we typically have a number of phases. And so we have an engineering design where we're doing design and review, and we may be transmitting documents back and forth between the vendor while internal engineers are reviewing the documents. Then we have a phase where we're doing issue for construction, and then we have the commissioning and startup phase, and then we have the practice of as-builting those projects back into our as-built system and migrating that content. So in terms of our capital project system, it started out, if I can click, it started out where we were primarily focused on just one phase, the supplier document control, and then we've expanded it to work also with the EPC transmittals back and forth. And so we're using Adept, and this is continuing to grow. We're continuing to implement new facets of that. We're working on the issue for construction phase as our next step. But we're using the workflow management. And I forget how many individual workflows we have, but for each project we've got workflows which are, have 3 or 4 people who are the people that need to be reviewing the document. So we're managing that, and we've got hundreds and hundreds of workflows that we're managing. But the reason we're using that is because we really enjoy the fact that we can get the email notifications. If somebody, they know they have work to do, they know if it's late, we get the reminders, etc. We're also interested in using the Audit Trail. We're extensively using, in some cases, the markup and redlining. We're marking up the documents and sending those back to the vendor so that they know what changes need to be made. Primarily, we're using the Adept viewer to do that markup. And we're also using transmittal. In the past, until recently, most of our transmittals were all done manually. So that takes a lot of time. In fact, Teresa Yang is with us today. She's actually done a tremendous amount of work with our transmittals. This is just a couple of samples. And it's gotten to a point where with the click of a button, we can do something that took a project admin, I don't know, half an hour or something to create. So we got some tremendous benefit by using our transmittals. All right, moving on to talk briefly about my reports. You also already saw a couple of examples of our value report. And me being a support guy kind of guy, a little bit geeky or whatever, I wanted to have a way of managing my servers. So this is just one view, but I have a whole bunch of servers. Each server has a whole bunch of different hard disks. And this is a way where at a dashboard I can just at a glance figure out how my disk statuses are and which, what the percentage of free space I have available. And I've got some other stuff on our reporting system, which I showed 2 years ago. This is where I can select a server and I can see all kind of different metrics on the disk space, disk read writes, and memory and CPU utilization and all of that stuff. But we also extended our reports to work with our projects groups. And so this is an example, and it's a fairly simple example, but it's just a report of, for a given project, how many documents have come in, gone out, come in the last week, gone out in the last week, how many are late back to the supplier document control group, and how many are late back from the vendor, broken down by project disciplines. We had a lady who was a project admin that was literally spending 4 hours a week downloading information from Adept into Excel and then working on trying to create pivot tables to create this report. And so by generating the report and automating it, not only do we not run it just once a week, we can run it daily, and it cuts out all that time. And not just that, but we got 30 or 40 different projects that are running now. So instead of having 30 or 40 project admins doing that same action, we now have it here. And, well, we also said, well, hey, if we can do that, we're using transmittals. Why don't we read the information out of Adept and create a transmittal log online? Because, believe it or not, what they were doing is they're maintaining a transmittal log by using Excel workbooks, manually creating entries for everything coming in, going out. With this transmittal log, what we're doing, I have a hyperlink on it. You can see all your information. We're doing a few calculations. Click on the hyperlink. It opens that document up in Adept Explorer. And in the data dashboard, you can see all the children, so you know what documents were attached to it. So we're giving them ready access to that. So this is a tremendous time savings for a project. All right, so enough of that. Hopefully that's just a brief overview of what we're doing with our 2 major systems. As far as metadata quality improvement, I guess the best thing to do is start with a value case of why are we doing this as-built Adept system. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to provide access to these documents. I mean, Putting them documents in a document management system, if you can't find them, doesn't bring any value. So we wanted these to be searchable. And we believe in robust metadata. Last night I was having dinner with someone, and I think the quote was, metadata makes the world go round, or something like that. So I mean, getting the data correct is very important. And by improving search, we reduce time that is wasted looking for documents. And we are literally reducing it from hours to minutes, or from minutes to seconds. And all of that time is measurable time savings, which goes to the bottom line. So we want to try and improve our metadata as much as we can. This is a depiction just of one. We have multiple data cards. We have data cards for each of the major migrations that we've done, so we can provide them work in a way that they are used to without interrupting their work processes. So this is just one example, but it has multiple tabs. And we can see, yeah, we got that, we got that, we got that. This is just one data card. In all, right now, we have 248 metadata fields that we're tracking for our documents. I know there's a limit of 900, so we could add some more, Greg. But we're at 248. All of that stuff potentially could be searchable. But if we want to make it valuable, we need to make sure that first it's accurate, and second that it's consistent. All right. So now you're sitting there on the edge of your seats. Don't fall down, please. You're sitting there on the edge of seats, and you're saying, well, Chris, how in the world does all this metadata get into the system, right? Well, it gets in there a couple of different ways. First off, it can be extracted from the documents, and that's our preferred method. We believe that the document is the master, and we want the database to reflect what's actually in the document. But not all documents are extractable, so we also import via Excel. Anybody else here import via Excel? I'm sure you do. Okay. We can also enter stuff manually, or we can edit stuff manually. And, oh yeah, we also migrate stuff from these legacy systems as part of our migration processes. And, you know, the good news is when you do this migration from other systems, you don't have to worry about the data quality because it is all pristine. Okay. Now, no matter how we get this document or this data into the system, there is always some human element involved, okay? There's always somewhere in the line, some human being created this stuff. Now, this is all pretty abstract, so let's try and make it a little bit more concrete. What does all this mean? If you looked at an example of a file guide here, this is a real-life example of a file guide. And what you may not know is that Dow actually has 8 separate sites that all have a very similar name called Freeport. Right here. Right? Okay. Not only that, we've also got 3 sites that are similarly named like LaPorte. Okay? And this is just touching the tip of the iceberg. I mean, this is the type of data quality sort of issues that we're dealing with. And if we go a little bit deeper and drill down, okay, in this case, I'm not a chemical engineer. I don't know whether the allyl chloride, or the allyl chloride, however that's pronounced, which of those 3 is correct. Now, by judging from the numbers, I could say, well, it looks like 2 of them are outliers and one's actual, but what that really means is that I got a 0.02% chance of getting the wrong document, or not finding the document that I'm interested in. But hey, you know, actually, well, that's 99.98% chance I do find what I'm looking for if that's the field that I search. But is that good enough? Well, it's good enough most of the time, but if the one document you're looking for is misspelled, you're out of luck. Or you could look at a different example. Here we have CA liquefaction distribution with a slash or a dash. Take your choice. In this case, in this particular case, you got either a 17% chance or an 83% chance of getting the right document when you look for it, right? Well, you could probably look for it multiple ways, but if you're doing that, you're just wasting time. So, now within Adept, there are a couple of things you could do to try and enforce some level of quality. You may be familiar with things like your restricted fields. Let's just restrict what people can put in that field. Or similarly, we could do related fields. Have any of you used related fields? It's great capability in some cases. However, when we start dealing with the desire to extract our documents, anytime you make a field restricted or related, it no longer becomes extractable. And so the other problem we have is that I've got 40 different sites out there, and I want to have a restricted field which has got, okay, I want 5 values in this particular field in my dropdown. Well, not all the sites agree on which 5 values that should be. And so that becomes a bit of a problem. And we also have different sites want different requirements. They've got a document and they classify it as this, and they say when it's this class of document, I want these fields filled out as required fields. Well, I can't make that required field for everyone because your required field settings and so forth, they're all global settings. So if I make it a required field, then it applies to everyone, not just that site. So just trying to manage this sort of thing is like herding cats. So our team got together and we said, what can we do to solve this problem? What we really need, we need some way of contextualizing or localizing some quality rules. So each site could have its own set of rules. They could define their rules, and because our libraries are largely set up by site, they could assign their rules to their libraries. And that way, we pass the control of quality to the locations. They have ownership of their own stuff. Not only do we want to be able to create rules, creating rules are fine, but we need to have a way where we can apply those rules to the 3 million documents we already have so we can determine where there are problems that need to be fixed. Well, even that's not good enough. Go ahead and run the report, come back with, 1.1 million documents that need to be fixed. That doesn't help you very much. You need another tool which is going to help you locate those documents and help fix them. Right. And then we also said, well, you know what? If we have the rules and we have the way of applying the rules to the existing documents and we have a way of helping to fix those documents, what do we do to keep from repolluting the data that we already have? So we need a way of checking the documents when we check them in and make sure they're valid. All right. So our goal, essentially, the team I belong to is not the data quality police. I don't own the content. I don't own the data rules or anything. We are a service provider. Our job is to help empower the sites to take ownership of their own data quality. In other words, we want to help the sites help themselves. So we needed to develop some tools that would allow us to do this. And rather than developing one single tool, we actually what I refer to as 5 easy pieces. We have 5 different components that make up this quality initiative. Now, if you know me, you would know that the first thing I would do is create a database. Okay, so we created a quality database. A great place to start. Inside of that database, we created a concept of a container called a rule set. So we could have a bunch of different rule sets, and each rule set could then have its own lists, and those own lists could have their own individual values, whatever they want. Have as many lists, as many values as you want. And since we have rule sets, it would also be good if we had, I don't know, maybe a set of rules. So we have the concept of rules, but these rules are actually made up of a series of tests. So the tests are basically conditions that need to be met in order for the document to be considered valid. All right, so you get yourself a database, you get it in place, everything's good. What do we need? Well, I don't want users going into SQL via Management Studio, writing their own SQL queries, trying to update all the stuff here. I need some kind of an interface for people who are going to work with quality to create the rules and update the stuff in the database. So we built a simple application called Rules Manager. And it does all the CRUD, the create, read, update, and delete of the information to create the rules and allow us to manage our rules. Good name for it, Rule Manager. All right. We talked about the reporting system, and in the reporting system every night we're bringing in a lot of data that we're using for our reporting, and that includes our file information. So we put that in our reporting system. And so I decided rather than trying to hit our production database to do our assessment, let's assess what we have in our reporting system. And so now I've got records, a copy of all the records for our stuff. We can check our metadata. And I've got a bunch of stuff in tables that sort of represent what the rules are. But what we really need is, well, how do I take stuff that's in those tables and turn it into something that could be meaningful and actionable? And at this point, our team came up with a rather clever solution, which is a dynamic SQL process. I don't know if you're familiar with SQL or if you've done anything with dynamic SQL, but basically this is a small engine, which it's a small engine inside of the SQL database, which reads the values that we have that define what the tests and rules and stuff are in the lists, and it dynamically writes the SQL statement that's represented by that rule, and then it applies it to the stuff that we have in the reporting solution, and then it comes up and says, oh, okay, we just assessed all this stuff, and here are your results. So we've placed all the results in one place. The next thing we need is a tool that a quality worker, someone who wants to go in and start fixing things, can use to read the stuff that's in the results and find documents that are bad and fix them. The next piece that we had was, we have a very talented programmer in our group who wrote a plugin for Adept. So in the desktop client, when someone goes to check the document in, it intercepts the check-in command. And it quickly checks using the same dynamic SQL process. It says, okay, that document's going into this library. Let me check to see if it complies with the rules that that library uses. And if so, well, it's transparent. It just keeps going. But if it doesn't, it throws up a message box saying, hey, here are the problems. And based on how the locations have defined their quality rules, they may say, well, okay, I just want to throw up a pop-up box and say, hey, there are problems with this, but let you go ahead and sign it anyway. Or maybe they say, nope, sorry, it's got problems, stop, kill the whole checking process, and we're done. Go fix it and then try again later. And so we'll talk about these a little bit more in just a moment. The final piece is, well, getting all this stuff in place is great, but if you really want to see improvement, create some kind of metric and some kind of dashboard and make it visual. And so that way, when people start seeing how bad things are, they'll start taking action to make corrections. So our last piece is basically a data quality dashboard. It's another tab in our reporting solution where we have visibility to see how well we're doing in terms of our data quality. So moving on, this is our quality rules manager. Just to give you a little bit more detail, it's got a few tabs at the top. We've got a manage tab, test tab, assign tab, and exemptions tab. When you're on the manage tab, you can see that's a simple tab. I've got a list of lists. And when I select one of those lists, I can then edit and create the values that belong to that list. So you can do your edit, update, delete, and all that stuff. The other one, the other tab, the rules tab, I did not get high marks for user interface design on this particular screen. It's a little bit busy, but what it's doing is actually broken into two parts. The first part, the upper part, is where I'm looking at the rules themselves. So I can have a rule, I can have a list of rules that I can select, and then I've got some fields where I can edit the name of the rule, a description of what the rule is supposed to do, and an error message that I want to present back to the user in the event that they're checking a document in and it doesn't meet that rule. And I've got a few other metadata fields that are associated with that rule. The second part is the test section. So when you select one of the rules, then you have this data grid that shows what actually represents those quality tests. And when you select one of the rows, then the section on the right gives you the ability to use drop-downs or whatever to define what goes into that data grid to define what the rule really is. So think about that. You've got those types of values. I've got some field and it's equal to some value. And I've got some other field and it's not null. That's what we're storing in the database. And when we get to the dynamic SQL part, we'll see what that does. So our next tab, suppose you've created rules. Well, wouldn't it make sense before we publish them to test them? Yeah, I think it makes sense. So the test tab allows us to navigate through the tree of our whole library structure, find a point, select which rule set you want, select which rule you want to test, and then click the test button. And when you do that, it automatically creates the SQL statement that's a valid SQL statement that you can then run to see whether all of your files are compliant with that. So that's the magic of the dynamic SQL part. And in this case, it would not only show you the SQL, but it will also list any documents at that node that are currently failing that point. Okay? After we are satisfied with the rules, the next thing we'd want to do is assign them to where they would belong in the library. So in this tab, we can select which library node, and we can select which rule set we want to assign, and then we can see which rule set we're assigning, which library is selected, and if there's already an assigned library, it shows you that as well. And then you can apply that to that point or that point and below. So we can assign all these rules now to the libraries. All right. The types of rules that we're talking about, we can take a look at almost any field in the system, and we can make sure that that field is in a defined list, if that list has been defined, if that's what the site needs. And that's by site, not globally. We can also do things like, let's say you have a specific document class or a specific discipline. We can say, for this document class or for this discipline, I demand that these particular fields have to be filled out. They can't be left blank. We've got some other things. We can look to see, let's say I've got two fields. They're both driven or populated from a list, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the combination of them is valid. You might have a large site and a plant and a building list, and the plant that you've selected is not part of the building. It's somewhere else in the site. So we can check to make sure that the combinations are valid. And we can do some other things such as make sure that everything's in uppercase. We can check date time fields. So let's say if you didn't want a document checked out more than a month, you could say, hey, if the checkout date is this date, if it's more than a month, let's call that a data quality error and flag it, and then you can chase it down. All right. And then some other things, we can identify whether we want to have that rule turned on or not, whether it's published. Whether we want to apply the rule to all content in the system or only new stuff coming in. You might not want to go back and fix all the stuff you already got. As I mentioned before, you can say when I check the document in, do I want to just give a warning or do I want to block it and prevent it from coming in until it's fixed? So these are all decisions that the sites get to make in terms of their data quality. And we also even have the ability to say, you know what, I want to mark that particular document as an exemption because I'm never going to go back and fix it, but I don't want to see it in the report anymore. So, hey, whatever the sites want. In terms of our quality app, it's similar. What you have is a navigation tree. You can drill down to any point in our library, and when you select that library node, it then gives you a list of all the documents that are located at that spot that have some kind of data quality error. And if you select the data, or if you select the record, the file, then it shows you a list of all the rules that that particular document is violating. And that can be helpful. You can also download this to Excel, or better yet, we've integrated with the API, so you have it open in Adept, and you click the button, and it opens that list of documents as a search result, so you can then go to your data cards and push your changes back. Now, maybe I don't want to go document by document. Maybe I'd really want to go rule by rule. So the alternate view is I can just select, show me all the rules that have failed, and when I select the rule, I get a list of all the documents that are bad. And maybe that's what I want to open because I want to focus on cleaning that data up at that time. I can't really show you a huge amount about the data quality plugin. When you go to check the document in, it pops up a box and it gives you a list. And so for every document that's being checked in that has errors, it says, here's the document, here's the error, and if it's marked yes or no, can I check it in or not, even with errors? And if it says, if any of them say no, then it aborts the process. Okay, so that's our data quality plugin. Our quality dashboard. Essentially, it's a simple chart. It's a line chart showing time. The red line here represents the total number of documents at that library node. The blue line shows the total number of errors that were detected, and the goldish orange line represents the total number of documents that have at least one error. And so what you can see when we turn these on, that particular site had a huge number of quality issues, and we worked with the site, and over time we've managed to reduce that down significantly. So this is showing us counts of errors. Another view is to show percentages. In this case, I can see the percentage of documents that have errors, and I can see the percentage of all possible errors that I could have. How many of them do I actually have? That's the blue line. Okay. And we have another view here, which is our just a breakout, a snapshot as of today. What is the distribution of errors? What percentage of errors does each rule have? So we can see, oh, this is maybe I've got a training issue, or maybe this is an area for me to focus. All right. We did a pilot in August of last year. That particular site had 500,000 documents. When we turned the rules on, we initially detected only 80,000 errors. They were actually pretty clean. They only 80,000, and they only had about 30,000 documents that had an error or more. Now that particular site does almost everything via its PDF, very few DWGs, very little extraction, which means that all of that metadata was manually entered or imported via Excel spreadsheet. But we worked with the site, we refined our tools, we refined the rules, and it took about 6 weeks for us to drive that error rate down to approximately 0. So, so what this, is my time up? What this shows is that if you have the right tools, you can actually make some significant progress. But the one thing I would say is, we didn't get bad data quality overnight, and you're probably not going to fix it overnight. So it's something that's going to take some time. So just to summarize, what we've done is we developed some tools that allow us to create rules that are assigned by site. We can evaluate the existing documents to determine how good the quality is. We have some tools now that allow us to find those documents, open the documents in Adept, and actually fix them, which is at the end of the day what you're trying to do. We also have the ability to intercept those documents when we're checking them in and make sure that they're correct and comply with the data quality requirements. And we've also built a dashboard which gives us our metrics and trends and visibility, all that stuff. All right, so finally, in conclusion, we're now at a point as we're rolling this quality initiative out. We are empowering the sites to own their own data quality. And at the end, what we're doing in improving the data quality, improving the search, we're adding to the value case of what we're doing with Adept. So, and that is my presentation. So any questions?
Gene, question. Can we get Gene a microphone and a raffle ticket?
Where's my raffle ticket? So first of all, amazing. Secondly, it sounds like you were only correcting the metadata. I'm wondering, did you also update the title blocks when they had errors?
For documents that are extractable, absolutely we are correcting the title blocks.
Good.
Now, the great thing is that with Adept 2017, if you determine you have a large number of these errors and they need to be corrected and it's extractable content, you can actually use the Excel import and you can use it not only to update the metadata but also to push it back to the document.
Perfect.
So that's a great feature and we're absolutely using it. So thank you.
Wonderful.
Other questions for Chris?
I was just curious to know how many different file types you were bringing in or managing.
I don't know the answer to that. We've got, I mean, there's predominantly we have a huge number of DGN microstation drawings. We've got a huge number of PDFs. We've got a huge number of DWGs, some Excel, some Zip, some Word. But with regard to our data quality tool, it really doesn't care. One of the things that we can do frequently, we can make a list of extensions. So maybe I can create a quality rule that is only going to be applied to a DGN or a DWG file. And so part of the language of constructing the rule, you can say, well, I want something that's a test to determine an error or a test to determine a filter to determine where I want to apply that rule. So, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
And quick request, when we ask questions, it would be great if you just announced your name and your company, just as we're all getting to know each other, it'd be helpful. Todd, did you have a question? Your name and company.
I need, there we go. So I'm Todd. I'm with Synergis.
Hi, Todd.
I'm a Pisces. No. Much to my wife's chagrin. No. How do you communicate value of the initiative to management? So that was a cliffhanger for me there, Mr. Wood.
That is a great question. I will refer to Greg Schuler.
Not to put you on the spot, Mr. Schuler, but to put you on the
since
spot.
Teresa's taking my place, I could. So the question was, how do we communicate the value to management?
Of this initiative,
Yeah. And I think that's been a bit of a challenge because this is a problem that I think most people don't realize that they had. Okay? It's been a problem that's existed for many years, but until you put your documents into the document management system, you don't know you have it. And when you put things in there, it becomes glaring. And the reason we started down this path was because after we had done some migrations, all of a sudden people start complaining about that Adept system, or in parts of Texas they say Adept. And people would say, I can't find my stuff in that Adept. And it's something wrong with Adept, right? Well, it's not. It's something wrong with their metadata from their site. So we started down this path really to try to improve the reputation of our solution by fixing a problem that we didn't create. So I think that's the focus. But in the end, we added this to our reporting solution, and our ultimate objective is to give a grade or a rating per site and publicize that and use that as sort of a little competition, or that say your site really sucks on here, right? So that's where we're trying to go. We're not there yet. Okay.
Another
Thank you.
question over here, a couple.
I'm Dan Genki with Lucite. We're about 3 years into using Adept. I guess my question is, many of us don't have capabilities like Chris does here. Is that something Synergis might be able to offer? Or I don't know how much this was jointly developed, and are those available for the rest of us who would hate to see our report cards on our metadata?
I turned to Todd Cummings during the presentation as I peeled my jaw off the floor and said, we've got to have this. So, yeah,
you got to have that.
We would love to have. I think this is amazing, and I can say without a doubt, we would love to be able to offer something like this. So the details of that, we'll let Todd talk to that maybe during the roadmap or something. But
right.
Yeah, quick, figure that out.
Also,
2018.
and if they don't want to do it, I may be available for a small fee.
That's right. That was my second question, is what's your schedule looking like, Chris?
I'm Kevin Klinger with Intest Corporation. We've been using Adept since it was NFM, and we're kind of stagnated like it was NFM. So all these things are fascinating, and this group is amazing. So thank you, Chris. But one thing I think that Adept is lacking is like a good user interface. So which users have access to which libraries and all those things. You can spit it out of Adept, but have you ever developed something that gives you a better GUI interface to see which groups have access to which libraries and what their abilities would be?
So inside of the Dow infrastructure, I actually have a SQL report that I can run, which creates basically an Excel spreadsheet that shows by group, by user, and which access they have. Additionally, because we're trying to distribute more and more of our the administration of managing users, because we have a lot of them, we're trying to distribute that to the sites, and we've created members of our team have created a new tool, which is an Adept user management tool. And what it does is it populates a SQL database, so you can come in and you can say, here is a site, and these are the groups. We can group together various Active Directory groups that need to be part of a viewer group or an editor group. So we create these roles, and then we assign people to the roles. So when they get assigned to the role, they pick up the various groups that that role holds, and then we pop it into our database, and then there's a mechanism to use that to force that to update our Active Directory system. And so by using Active Directory, that gets our people in there, and we just need to make sure that but we can also do the manually query the database and create Excel and things like that. And I mean, we do some other things. I've got some other neat stuff that I don't have time to show, but yeah, talk to me later.
Yeah, I will. I'll take those offline. That's very good.
Yeah, find Chris, Greg, Teresa from Dow. They're a wealth of knowledge, experience, and they've always been real open and willing to share what they've learned. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Chris.